can't believe this. After all these years, this is how you tell me.
My name is Clara Morgan. I am 62 years old. I have lived in my townhouse in the heart of Chicago for 30 years. This house has been more than just walls and a roof to me. It has been the place where I raised my son, Ethan, the home where I built my life with my late husband, David, and the sanctuary where I imagined growing old in peace. I had just returned from a week-long trip to visit my oldest friend, Helen, in Seattle. I had looked forward to this trip for months. Quiet mornings with coffee, long walks by Lake Union, evenings filled with laughter and stories. I was ready to come home, to slip back into my routine, and maybe even surprise Ethan and his wife, Monica, with a home-cooked dinner. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found. As I turned the corner onto my street, my breath caught. My 4 suitcases were lined neatly on the sidewalk, rain lightly speckling the fabric. At first, I thought maybe a moving company had delivered something by mistake. Then I noticed the note, tucked under the handle of the largest suitcase. "If you want to stay here, we have the garage. Your loving daughter-in-law, Monica." I stared at the words. My hands trembled. I had lived in this house for 30 years. Every corner, every floorboard, every window held memories of my family, my husband, and my son. And now, I was reduced to a visitor in my own home. My mind raced. I remembered the first time David and I walked through this townhouse, freshly painted and smelling of promise. We had chosen every fixture, every curtain, every piece of furniture together. We planted the small cherry tree in the courtyard, imagining Ethan playing under its branches someday. After David passed 2 years ago, I had hoped to continue living here, quietly, surrounded by the life we built. Legally, I had signed over the house to Ethan and Monica, but I never imagined it would feel like I was giving up my home entirely. I picked up my phone with shaking fingers and dialed the bank, half expecting that maybe, just maybe, there had been a mistake. "Mrs. Morgan, your automatic mortgage payment of $2,100 went through last Friday as scheduled," the representative confirmed. My voice caught as I whispered, "Thank you." I ended the call and let the reality settle in. The sky above had darkened, heavy clouds rolling in as if to mirror my mood. I had been paying the mortgage all along, quietly keeping the house afloat, while my son and his wife lived comfortably, fully aware of my contribution. And now they had decided I didn't belong here. I remember standing on the sidewalk, raindrops cold on my forehead, staring at my luggage, imagining the life inside those walls continuing without me. It felt unreal, like a dream from which I couldn't wake. Small hints had been there over the years, the sideways glances whenever I mentioned redecorating, the subtle comments about senior communities where I could relax while they handled the house. The rearranged living room last Christmas, my reading chair moved to the basement while I was away. All small things, until now they added up to this betrayal. I finally walked towards the garage. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open. Inside, the room had been converted into a makeshift apartment. A twin mattress leaned against one wall, a small mite-stand with a lamp beside it, and my clothes hanging on a portable rack. Boxes labeled "Mom's Stuff" in Monica's neat handwriting were stacked along the walls. My books, photos, and keepsakes, the remnants of my life, were now boxed and out of reach. I sank onto the thin mattress, feeling the cold concrete beneath me. Through the small window, I could see the townhouse that had once been my sanctuary, now towering above me, like a reminder that I had been cast aside. My phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Mom, we need the space. Monica has been asking for a home office for months. The garage has everything you need. Don't make this difficult." Don't make this difficult. The words stung, sharper than any storm. They made me feel like an inconvenience, a burden, a problem to be solved. I had spent decades caring for this family, quietly supporting them, sacrificing my comfort for theirs, and now all that love and labor seemed invisible. I let the tears fall silently, hot against my cheeks. The city's noises, the distant traffic, the rumble of a bus, the occasional honk of impatient drivers faded into the background. I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life, yet a part of me was already stirring, a small spark of something that refused to be extinguished. I wasn't sure what the next step would be. All I knew was that the person I had been, the quiet, accommodating, always available mother, would not disappear so easily. My life, my home, my dignity, none of it could be boxed up so neatly. And as the rain poured harder, soaking through my coat and matting my hair, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not let this be the end of my story. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, but I still sat on that thin mattress in the garage, staring at the window that framed my old life. My mind wandered back through decades, back to when David and I first walked through this townhouse together. The hardwood floors had smelled faintly of fresh paint and polish, and the sunlight spilled through the tall windows like a promise. I could still remember David's laughter echoing in the living room as he lifted me up to peek at the chandelier we had chosen together. Every inch of this house held a memory, every corner a story. I thought of Ethan as a boy, small and curious, climbing the staircase 2 steps at a time, always with scraped knees or muddy shoes. I remembered the nights I stayed awake when he had fevers, holding his tiny hand, whispering that everything would be all right. I remembered the first time he rode his bike without training wheels, how proud he looked, and how proud I was. And now, that little boy, once so full of wonder, had grown into a man who seemed more concerned with convenience and appearances than with the family that raised him. Holidays had been my favorite. Christmas mornings filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, laughter bouncing off the walls as Ethan tore open gifts, Thanksgiving dinners with friends and neighbors spilling into the living room, chairs scraping across the hardwood floor as everyone reached for more pie, and David, his favorite chair by the fireplace, where he'd sip his coffee and read the newspaper, always teasing me when I tried to rearrange anything. Those were the moments that had defined our family, that had made this house more than just bricks. This house was my life, my identity. But somewhere along the way, the tone had shifted. Ethan and Monica had begun to grow impatient with the little things. I remembered the sideways glances when I suggested repainting the kitchen a softer shade of yellow, the polite yet distant nods whenever I brought up furniture rearrangements. Monica had once suggested that perhaps I should consider a smaller place, somewhere I wouldn't have to worry about stairs or yard work. At the time, I had brushed it off as concern. But now, in the cold light of betrayal, those moments felt like warnings I had ignored. I thought about the day Ethan and Monica had moved the reading chair from the living room to the basement, claiming they were just trying something new. I had laughed nervously, pretending I didn't care, but their casual control over my space was only a small reflection of the power they were building to push me out completely. Every conversation I'd had in the past few years, every subtle suggestion about senior living or downsizing had been laying the groundwork for this moment, and yet I had never seen it coming. The thought of confronting them filled me with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and a sharp sadness I couldn't shake. I had spent 30 years building this life, and yet, in a single note tucked under my suitcase, they had reduced me to a visitor, a problem to be managed. I traced the words with my finger, as if touching them could somehow erase their sting. If you want to stay here, we have the garage. Your loving daughter-in-law, Monica. I rose slowly from the mattress, my joints stiff from sitting too long on cold concrete. I moved closer to the boxes that held what was now officially my stuff. Each box was labeled in Monica's neat handwriting: Mom's books, Mom's photos, Mom's keepsakes. My eyes lingered on a box with a faded photograph of David and me at our wedding, the corners worn from decades of love. I couldn't help but let my fingers brush over the photo, tracing the smiles frozen in time. I realized then that the garage apartment was not just a physical space, it was a symbol of how little they understood, how little they appreciated, and perhaps how little they even cared. I had been part of their lives for so long, sacrificing quietly, bending without breaking, and now they had made it clear I was a burden. As I stood there, looking at my boxed-up life, I felt a mix of grief and determination. The townhouse beyond the garage was still mine in memory, still mine in every thought and recollection, but the present demanded a response. I could not simply accept being shuffled aside, even by my own family. My stomach tightened, a nervous knot of fear and resolve. I had to decide what to do next. For now, all I could do was step into the garage, close the door behind me, and face the reality of my new, cold apartment. My belongings, my life, were boxed up and stacked along the walls. My son and daughter-in-law had taken control of my home, my space, and my comfort. And yet, as I sat on that mattress, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, the quiet stirrings of resistance. The garage smelled of concrete and dust, a sharp contrast to the warmth and comfort of my townhouse. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, flickering as if uncertain about my presence. I surveyed the space slowly. Against one wall was a thin, lumpy mattress that barely seemed big enough to fit me. Next to it, a small nightstand held a tiny lamp, its shade crooked. The rest of my life, books, photographs, trinkets, was crammed into cardboard boxes stacked along the edges of the garage. Each box bore Monica's neat, precise handwriting: Mom's books, Mom's photos, Mom's keepsakes. I sank onto the mattress, the cold concrete pressing through the thin fabric. I felt a shiver run through me, not from the chill, but from humiliation. 32 years of my life, and I had been reduced to sleeping in a garage, while my son and his wife used my home as if I had never been there. I ran my hands over the boxes, touching the edges of a photo frame, a well-worn novel, a candle holder that David had bought me decades ago. Each object was a memory, a piece of my identity, and seeing it tucked away like disposable possessions cut deeper than any words. As I stared around the small space, my mind wandered back, and I remembered the tiny, almost imperceptible signs over the years that I had ignored, thinking I was overreacting. The sideways glances whenever I mentioned repainting the kitchen a softer, warmer color. The polite suggestion from Monica about smaller, easier spaces as I approached my 60s. The Christmas when they had moved my favorite reading chair from the living room to the basement, claiming they wanted to try something new. At the time, I smiled, pretending it didn't matter, telling myself it was a minor change. But now, in this cramped, concrete-walled apartment, it all made sense. Each comment, each rearrangement, each subtle nudge toward downsizing had been a step toward this moment. Their patience, their smiles, their polite gestures, they were all carefully calibrated to make me feel unwelcome, to prepare me to leave my own home. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to stop the tears, but they came anyway, silent, hot, and unrelenting. The betrayal was bitter and sharp. I had spent years making sacrifices for this family. I had worked long nights when David's business was struggling, paying bills I didn't need to pay, ensuring my son could live comfortably, ensuring Monica could pursue her career without worrying about the mortgage. And now, after everything, they had tossed me out like an old coat, neatly baxed and labeled, shoved aside for a home office. I leaned back against the concrete wall, staring at the ceiling, and my thoughts turned to my oldest friend, Linda. She was the one person I could call without hesitation, the one who would understand the depth of my heartbreak without judgment. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling, and typed quickly. "Linda, I need your help. I've been put in the garage. Can you come over, please?" I stared at the message for a moment, my finger hovering over send. I hesitated, wondering if anyone could truly help me now. But the isolation, the humiliation, the sense of betrayal, it was unbearable to face alone. With a deep breath, I pressed send. The small chime of the message going through sounded almost like a relief, a tiny signal that I wasn't completely alone. Somewhere beyond the garage, my son and son-in-law were living comfortably, oblivious to the storm they had caused. But I had taken the first step. I had reached out. I had refused to disappear quietly. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the city streets slick and shiny, reflecting the pale light of the street lamps. I sank further into the mattress, my back aching and my heart heavier than it had been in years. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small ember of determination stirred. I wasn't going to vanish. I wasn't going to let them decide my worth. Not anymore. I closed my eyes, imagining Linda rushing over, her strong presence by my side, and for the first time since stepping into the garage, I felt a small spark of hope. This was my life, my story, and I wasn't ready to let it end in a garage. The chime of the doorbell startled me, echoing through the narrow garage apartment. I hurried to open it, and there was Linda, her umbrella dripping rainwater onto the concrete floor. She stepped in, giving me a warm, firm hug. "Clara, what happened?" she asked, her eyes scanning the boxes, the mattress, and the cramped space. I don't even know where to start," I whispered, my voice trembling. They put me in the garage. Ethan, Monica, my son, they think I'm a problem." Linda's expression hardened, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "They did what? Clara, you've lived there for decades. This is your home." I sank onto the mattress, gesturing helplessly at my boxed-up belongings. "I've been paying the mortgage all along, quietly, just to keep everything running. And now I'm treated like I'm invisible." Linda shook her head slowly. "Invisible? They've gone too far." She reached into her bag and pulled out her nephew, Michael, a young lawyer in his late 20s. Tall, sharp-eyed, dressed neatly in a blazer over a casual shirt, he gave me a polite nod. "Hi, Mrs. Morgan," his voice calm but attentive. Linda explained a little. "I understand there's a situation with your home." I took a shaky breath and recounted everything: the note, the garage apartment, the boxed-up belongings, and finally the secret mortgage payments I had continued for the past 2 years. As I spoke, Michael listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "So let me get this straight," he said, after a few moments, his brow furrowed. "The house was legally transferred to your son and his wife, but you have been paying the mortgage since the transfer." "Yes," I whispered, feeling my cheeks heat with embarrassment. I just wanted to help. I never wanted to cause trouble." Michael leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Legally, this could be significant. You've essentially been funding the property without recognition, and now they've evicted you to the garage. There are definitely options here." I felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. "Options? Michael, they treated me like trash. My own son, my husband's memory, everything. I can't believe they would do this. Linda put a hand on my shoulder. Clara, it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel betrayed. And you're not alone. That's why Michael is here, to help you figure out your next steps. Michael nodded. First, let's understand exactly what you've contributed. Mortgage payments, repairs, upkeep. If you have records, that strengthens your position. You may have a claim to recover what you've paid, or even leverage to negotiate the future of the house. We don't have to rush into court immediately, but knowing your legal rights is the first step. I swallowed hard, trying to process it all. Anger mixed with humiliation, disbelief with a flicker of hope. All those quiet years of sacrifice, all those late nights and careful planning had not gone unnoticed, not by the law, at least. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted quietly, looking down at my hands. I feel embarrassed, Michael. How could I have let it go this far? Don't feel embarrassed, he said firmly. You've been a good mother, a good homeowner, and you've been taken advantage of. That's not a failing on your part. That's a situation you're now empowered to fix. Linda smiled reassuringly. Clara, you've always handled everything with grace. Now it's time to handle this with strength. You're not powerless. You're just waking up to the truth. I nodded, taking a deep breath. The mixture of anger, grief, and disbelief was still heavy in my chest, but now it was paired with determination. Maybe, just maybe, I could take back some control, reclaim my home, and remind my son and daughter-in-law who I truly was. Michael handed me a small notepad. Let's start documenting everything. Payments, dates, interactions, everything that shows your involvement and your contributions. From there, we'll see what legal options make sense. And remember, Mrs. Morgan, this isn't just about property. It's about respect, dignity, and fairness. You deserve all three. I exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of clarity piercing through the fog of betrayal. For the first time since stepping into the garage, I felt a spark of hope. The first step was understanding my power, and now, with Linda and Michael by my side, I wasn't alone. The boxes around me no longer felt like a cage. They were a reminder of what I had built and what I still had the right to protect. That night in the garage apartment, the hum of the city outside felt distant, like a world that had moved on without me. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, and let my thoughts drift through the years. Memories came unbidden, some warm, some painful. I remembered the nights I worked extra shifts when Ethan's tuition bills seemed insurmountable. I had stayed awake with him during late-night study sessions, quizzing him on biology terms and algebra formulas, cheering quietly when he finally understood a difficult concept. I remembered signing checks, rearranging our budget, tightening belts, all so he could have a chance to succeed. I thought of the weekends I had spent watching his children so he and Monica could go on date nights, so they could build their careers and their life together without worrying about childcare. The meals I cooked, the birthdays I remembered, the scraped knees I kissed better, all forgotten now, as if my efforts had never mattered. The injustice of it made my chest ache, a heavy, relentless pressure. And yet, beneath the hurt, a spark of resolve flickered. I had given so much of myself, silently, selflessly, and now it was time to honor those sacrifices, not by hiding or forgiving quietly, but by standing up for myself, standing up for my dignity. I thought about Ethan and Monica. I thought about how they had taken control of my home, how they had packed up my life into cardboard boxes, and how they had tried to erase me from the very place I had built for decades. The betrayal stung like a cold wind through my soul. But anger alone would not solve anything. I needed calm, clarity, and courage. I rose from the mattress and walked over to the window, looking at the townhouse across the narrow driveway. The lights glowed warmly inside, a life I had nurtured, a home I had loved. I could see Monica moving through the living room, placing something on the mantel. My reading chair had been removed, I realized, replaced by a sleek, modern armchair. They were changing everything, reshaping my world while I sat here in exile. I pressed my hands to the glass, imagining the confrontations that lay ahead. I would need to speak clearly, firmly, and without hesitation. I would need to let them know that my contributions, the mortgage payments, the sacrifices, the countless nights and days of care, were not invisible, that my presence, my life, and my love mattered. I could feel the tremor of fear, the worry that standing up might permanently strain my relationship with my son. But deep down, I knew that hiding any longer would destroy me more. I had to confront the truth, even if it meant facing anger, resistance, or rejection. I turned from the window and looked at the stacked boxes around me. My life was in those boxes, my identity pressed into cardboard and tape, but I refused to see them as a cage. They were a reminder of everything I had built, everything I had given, and everything I still had the right to protect. By the time I set my alarm and settled under the thin blanket, my mind was resolute. Tomorrow I will go to my house, not as a quiet guest or a displaced mother, but as Clara Morgan, a woman who had loved, worked, and sacrificed for decades, and who would no longer be invisible. Sleep came slowly, a restless mix of anxiety and anticipation. Yet beneath it all, I felt a sense of strength growing within me, a determination that tomorrow I would face them and demand the respect and recognition I had earned. The city lights flickered outside my small window, and I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, I take my first real step back into my life." The next morning, I dressed carefully, smoothing my hair and adjusting the blouse I hadn't worn in months. My hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the surge of determination that had been building inside me since the night before. I gripped my purse tightly and stepped out into the crisp city air. The streets glistened from last night's rain, and the early sunlight reflected off the glass facades of neighboring townhouses. As I walked up the familiar path to my front door, the reality hit me like a cold gust. I had lived here for more than 30 years. Every corner, every fixture, every photograph in that house held a memory, a story, a piece of my life. And now I was about to step into the very place that had been my sanctuary, knowing I would not be welcome. I rang the doorbell. The chime echoed through the house, and I could hear footsteps approaching. Monica opened the door first, her smile tight and practiced. "Clara," she said, masking surprise, "we weren't expecting you." "I need to speak with both of you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's about the house." Monica hesitated, then stepped aside, signaling Ethan to come from the kitchen. He emerged, wiping his hands on a towel, his posture casual, his face carefully neutral. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked. His tone was polite, but I could sense the underlying impatience. "I came to talk about the house," I replied firmly. "I know about your plans to sell it." Ethan exchanged a glance with Monica, their silent communication swift and confident. "Clara," Ethan began, his voice measured, "you signed the house over to us. It's our property now. We get to decide what happens to it." The words struck me like a blow. 30 years, all my sacrifices, my mortgage payments, the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick, the weekends spent with his children so he and Monica could have time to themselves. Gone, erased, with 5 words. It's our property now. I've been paying the mortgage for the past 2 years, I said, my hands trembling slightly as I gestured toward them. Every month, $1,800, keeping a roof over your heads. And this is how you treat me? Monica's smile never wavered. Clara, we appreciate that you helped, but it doesn't change the legal situation. The house is ours. We get to decide what happens to it. The betrayal burned in my chest. I realized, with a heavy heart, that the son I had raised, the boy I had nurtured with all my love, had been replaced by a man who saw me as an inconvenience, a problem to be managed, a barrier to his comfort. I see, I said quietly, my voice calm but firm. Then I suppose there's nothing left to discuss. I turned to leave, feeling the weight of decades pressing down on me, but also a strange new lightness. For the first time, I recognized that I no longer had to hide. I no longer had to be invisible. I had my memories, my life, and soon my next steps. Before stepping off the porch, I paused and looked back at Ethan. Your father would be ashamed of you. And so am I. I closed the door behind me quietly, leaving the sound of the city and the warmth of the morning air around me. My legs felt unsteady, but my heart was steadier than it had been in years. As I walked down the familiar street toward the garage apartment, a resolute settled deep in my chest. They had tried to erase me, to make me small, to push me aside. But they didn't know the woman I had always been, and they would soon learn the price of taking someone's life, love, and labor for granted. The following morning, I met Michael in his small office downtown, the sunlight streaming through tall glass windows that overlooked the bustling city streets. Cars honked, pedestrians hustled past, and yet inside there was a quiet focus. The smell of polished wood and paper filled the room, and Michael gestured for me to sit across from his desk. Clara, thank you for coming, he began, his eyes calm but serious. After what you've told me, there are a few things we need to consider carefully. I sank into the chair, my hands resting on my lap. Michael, I want to do the right thing. I don't know what that is anymore. He leaned forward. First, let's talk about what you've already done. You've been paying the mortgage for a house that's no longer in your name. Those payments could be considered part of a verbal agreement or implied contract, which gives you legal leverage. I frowned, the complexity of it pressing on me. Leverage? What do you mean? Michael picked up a stack of papers. One option is a lien. If we file a lien against the house, it effectively prevents your son and Monica from selling it without addressing your claim. You could also potentially recover the mortgage payments you've made since the transfer, especially if we can show they accepted the benefit without your consent or acknowledgement. My stomach tightened. So I can stop them from just taking everything? Yes, Michael said, at least temporarily. It gives you control while we negotiate or pursue legal action. The key here is documentation, your payments, your communications, anything that shows your involvement and your understanding that you were still financially responsible. I nodded slowly, the anger and disbelief rising again. All those years of sacrifice, all those quiet acts of love finally had a chance to be recognized. Yet my heart faltered. I want to protect my home, I admitted, but I don't want to destroy my relationship with Ethan. He's my son. I love him. Michael's expression softened. Clara, I understand. That's a natural conflict. You're trying to balance justice for yourself with the hope of preserving family bonds. But you have to remember, standing up for yourself does not mean you stop loving him. It means you demand respect and fairness. Sometimes people only understand the consequences of their actions when faced with them directly. I leaned back, considering his words. I had given everything to my son over the years, my time, my energy, my savings, and now he had made me invisible. And yet, I hesitated. I wanted to give him one last chance to see me as more than an obligation. Maybe I should speak to them first. Let them know what I know. Let them understand what they've done before taking legal action. I still hope they'll do the right thing. Michael nodded, though he looked cautious. That's reasonable. Sometimes a confrontation, when done calmly and with clarity, can be enough. But you need to be prepared. You're not negotiating out of weakness. You're negotiating from a position of strength. I clenched my hands, feeling the mix of fear, anger, and determination. I could see the path ahead: confrontation, assertion, and if necessary, legal action. I would not be invisible anymore. I would not be ignored. Clara, Michael added, remember this: standing up for yourself isn't betrayal. It's a declaration of your worth. And your son, your family, they need to understand that. I nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. My mind flashed through memories: late-night study sessions with Ethan, scraped knees kissed better, birthday cakes baked, college tuition paid. All of it had led to this moment, the chance to reclaim what was mine, not just for the house, but for my dignity. I left Michael's office with a renewed sense of purpose. The city outside bustled with life, unaware of the quiet revolution growing inside me. Tomorrow I would confront Ethan and Monica again. Tomorrow I would make them see me. And if they failed to understand, I knew I had the power, the law, and the evidence on my side. The choice weighed heavily on me: love for my son versus justice for myself. But deep down, I knew that fairness and respect could no longer be optional.